recording now.
Okay, excellent. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm Yassi Mogadam. I'm the Executive Director of the International Society of Service Innovation Professionals. And it's my pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to this second session that we're doing in collaboration with the National Science Foundation on Future of Work, Learning and Skills. And before we actually turn over to the session, I want to ask our President, Ulf Veneras, to say a few words about ISSIP, and then we'll get into what we're going to do in the session. So Ulf, you want to take it from here?
Thank you so much, Yassi, and welcome everyone. So quick introduction, I'm Ulf Veneras. I'm the current president of ISSIP. And before going through any of the details on this slide, I want to do a pitch. So the way it works with the vice president and president of ISSIP is there is an election every year. And then you have a elected vice president that will sit for a year. And then the year after, that person becomes the president. So at the bottom of this slide is a very easy URL, www.issip.org, and then the 2022 VP nominations. If you go in there, you see the candidates for the 2022 vice president election. And I just want to encourage everyone to go in there, have a look, and cast their vote. So quick summary of ISSIP. So ISSIP is a non-profit organization that really focus on service innovation and the future of work and education. And I think what really attracted me to ISSIP when I joined was the mix of academia and professionals. And for me, that's really a unique value proposition in the industry that we're all active in. Because it's not that many platforms that take the thought leadership from the academia and combine it with the insights and experience from the industry and drive these important things forward. And if we look at the three call-outs here, the areas where ISSIP's really active in is to influence the future of work and education, where we work together with NSF, the European Union, and so on to really outline and provide input what the future of education and work should look like. We drive that thought leadership in service innovation, and that is focused a lot on driving service innovation as an academic discipline. And we also have training programs for enterprises and help them to enhance their way, how they work in the area of service innovation. And then finally, the right-hand side here, what I called out earlier as well is it's really a unique group, this group of people here, where we have the representation from different enterprises, different businesses, also some student representation, but mainly also the combination of senior academia that provides their insights and the outcome from their teaching and their research. Final call out on this one is ISSIP today have above 1,400 members, and that's across 42 countries. So it's a very, very global reach and global organization. So thanks for this. And again, please go in on that URL. I saw that Jim posted the link in the chat of this meeting and cast your vote. We have a number of really, really qualified candidates, and this is your opportunity to influence. And with that, thank you so much. Looking forward to this workshop, and back to Yassi.
Thank you so much, Ulf. So let me share my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so this workshop is the second in a series of 4 workshops we are holding on behalf of the NSF. And the goal is really to foster a dialogue between industry and academia to develop collaborative approaches that can close the gap between undergraduate education and employment in STEM. And we had our first workshop last week, and each of the workshops are focused on a specific theme. And actually, the recording of that workshop is available. If you go on ISSIP website, you can, if you didn't participate, you can certainly watch the recording. So today we'll focus on industry best practices for skills screening. And then also on our website, you can check out the future 2 workshops. I want to do a shout out to our sponsor, NSF, who has enabled really this project for us. So we're very thankful to NSF's support. And also I want to acknowledge another sponsor, Cisco, who has really supported this project behind the scenes and enabled a lot of capabilities for us. So we really thank our sponsor. Others I want to call out, certainly the project team, my colleagues, Dr. Haluk Demirkan from University of Washington, Dr. Lou, Professor Emeritus from San Jose State University, and Dr. Martha Russell from Stanford, and my good colleague, Dr. Joe Ewan. And then we have a great programming committee and a number of workshop chairs who over the last few months have been really contributing to make this possible. So thanks, everyone. Then I want to introduce you to our distinguished panel. I want to thank this distinguished panel, PK Agrawal from UC Santa Cruz, David Albert from Geopogo, Kelly Bailey from MZ Burning Glass, Utpal Menkla from IBM, Sukhandana from 110, and Gonzalo Salguero from Cisco. And you'll get to meet them in a few minutes. So we have a full agenda today. The first part, we're actually going through that. Then we'll turn it over to PK and other speakers to basically discuss industry academia partnerships for upskilling best practices. And then we go into a short break, come back and regroup and go over some results of a survey that we are conducting in conjunction with these workshops. And then we have some exercises into breakout sessions, and then we'll wrap up. So just before I turn it over to our panelists, just a bit of context about our work with NSF. And, we started this work about almost exactly 2 years ago. And what NSF wanted us to do then, to get an industry perspective on STEM education for the future. And that work culminated in a framework that was published in recently, July of this year, by Springer as a paper, proposed roadmap to close the gap between undergraduate education and STEM employment across industry sectors. And the essence of that was really this framework that we put together from the insights that we got from our panel of experts, from the survey that we had conducted. And this framework really, while the skills keep evolving, we believe that this is as a framework, this is what's needed for the future. So skills are divided into specialized skills and foundational skills. And something you see in other reports. In our report specifically, we delved into what we call foundational skills, and there identified some work practice skills that are transferable, and soft skills separate from work practice skills. And then finally, the insight from industry basically said skills are necessary but not sufficient, and mindsets are important. And finally, we need to make sure that all the underrepresented populations have the opportunities for the jobs of the future. So our present work builds on that work, and really NSF asked us after that previous work to answer a few other questions. One was, how has COVID and long-term impacts of COVID to work have impacted the skills demand? And then also, they wanted to get more insights into how industry does screens for skills in the recruiting process, and how can that be aligned with some pedagogical practices. So this is the focus of this workshop, and then there are, you can see the other questions that are focused for our remaining workshops. And you can learn about the remaining workshops actually at our website. So based on the work that we've done so far, we're still doing data gathering, but having gone through and having asked the question from industry experts, how has your view about skills changed since COVID hit? This is what we've gotten so far based on interim results. And one thing that is definitely loud and clear is working remotely back then didn't even made it on the map. And today, there are a set of skills that are required for working remotely. And that is really something that jumped out at us. And we're still working on this because the research is not is still undergoing, and this workshop actually is one way for us to delve deeper into this work. So the goal of this workshop is gaining insight into how industry recruiters and hiring managers screen STEM graduates for specialized skills, for foundational skills, and for mindsets and culture fit. And our goal is to examine best practices so that down the road, a mapping can be made between industry best practices and pedagogical best practices to inform higher education. With that, I will turn it over to PK Agrawal to start us with the panel. PK is the Dean of UC Santa Cruz Extension, and also known for being a former CIO of the state of California, or CTO. PK, correct me if I'm wrong. So PK, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Yassi. And before I start, I just want to make a few remarks. First of all, I want to congratulate ISSIP leadership for taking on this very, very important topic. I mean, this is thought leadership, this is groundbreaking, and I think it's going to shape the way workforce is developed in the future. And so with that, when I'm asked to moderate this panel, I felt honored. I felt, oh my God, this is a very important conversation. So I asked a friend of mine, said, how do you moderate these kind of things? And he said, look, your job is very simple. You need to look dull. Therefore, by contrast, all the speakers will look good. Then I went around talking to all my panelists, and I said, I don't have to try to look dull. I'm going to look dull because we have such exceptional talent here. And anyway, seriously, and I mean it. I mean, it's just we have a wonderful story to tell. So let me contextualize this conversation about best practices for skill screening by the industry for STEM. Just think back 25, 30 years ago. Life was very simple. Universities, which I belong to now, used to have a very academic sort of a role. We develop your intellect, and just kind of turn it over. And at some point, industry took over. Most of the companies, large, small, had their training programs, and the work was very predefined. And therefore, they just run it through a training program. I went through one such training program with EDS, and then you get on to the business. The world has changed. I don't think any industry can at this point sort of say, well, we know how to train them best. It has to be a partnership. It has to start from beginning of especially higher education, to say we're going to shape them not only to become intellectuals, not only to become good citizens, but also to become productive professionals. So consequently, I would say industry is taking the lead by and large in coming up with best practices. AI software is helping, thinking about different skill sets, and they're reaching out to the universities and saying, hey, let's partner on this thing together. And mentoring programs, partnership programs, looking at population demographics as to how to have the right mix of people. So that's the revolution that's taking place. And that's where ISSIP in the series of things are coming up with this groundbreaking thinking about. So anyway, so I've said enough. By the way, if you see a new face here, I do want to give a shout out to my good friend, Catherine Stenzel from Houston. She's formerly with the oil and gas industry and done some really groundbreaking work in this area. We just couldn't make it all work, but perhaps later on she has a story to tell as well. Anyway, so our sequence is that we're going to let each of the panelists tell their story for about 7-8 minutes each, and then we'll get into a conversation and you weigh in. It's a small enough group that we can do that. So we're going to go in the order of Kelly, followed by Utpal, Gonzalo, Sukanta, and finally wrap up with Dave. And I know it's a little bit of a 1 hour and 35 minutes, so feel free to do jumping jacks in between, whatever it takes, make faces. Let's just stay awake and entertained here. So with that, Kelly, you're on.
Thank you so much, PK and everybody. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, it's just such a pleasure to be here with you all. PK, I'll have to say it, but I definitely feel the way that you felt. I was like, it's amazing, all of the people that I knew were going to be here, and now seeing all these lovely faces, I'm really excited to be able to share with you what I've learned over the years and learn from you as well. So thank you all for having me. So my lens on this is that I have been working, as he mentioned in the intro, I am the Global Skills Evangelist at MZ Burning Glass. MZ Burning Glass is a labor market analytics firm. I have been doing this kind of work, and what I mean by this kind of work is trying to tackle the wicked problem of skills-based hiring and learning for over 17 years now. My lens into this has always been sort of in this epicenter of it all, which I mean, people sort of being able to clearly navigate their education and career journey in a whole new different way. And in order for me to be able to sort of tackle that problem, I recognized that there was this big onion of a problem in front of us. It was that there were a ton of barriers that were happening in the processes and the systems within employers, within education. And of course, at that time when I started this, there wasn't all of the wonderful forms of alternative education that there are now. So, that has sort of added and in some cases lessened this wicked problem. But for me, it was always, this combination, this journey included all of it. We had to be able to navigate in and out And I even back that many years, even when I graduated from school, I recognized that it was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate this lifelong situation with this concept of us just having this one job after we graduate from university, maybe moving on to a master's or a PhD, but having this one job and moving up this career ladder was sort of long gone. And with that being long gone, what kind of information could we have as individuals out there to help us move along in this journey? And I always saw skills as being sort of this communication layer, because the real currency of the labor market back when I started was the typical, you have your resume or your CV, your previous job history. If you have a degree, in some case it was a certificate at the time, but that was pretty much it. And then, of course, from an employer perspective, if they were looking to hire someone, they had a job posting. Now, again, this was pretty early days when everything started to go online. There was Monster, you could apply to jobs, all that good stuff. But as we started to see some technology emerge in this area, we started to see what I would say would be some challenges. And these are not challenges that have completely gone away, which is, even though I'm discussing some things that maybe were starting back, almost 20 years ago, these are still things that we're working towards today. So that's why I'd like to mention some of those as we jump into this conversation. Things like with an employer, the applicant tracking systems, and actually underneath the applicant tracking systems, the actual automated intelligence technology that's being used to read the CVs and resumes that are going through those systems. That is sort of just like one issue that we have within employers. I actually started in this field working for a recruiting company, a subsidiary of Randstad. And so I got to work very closely with a number of employers within their hiring process. And I learned that it doesn't only stop and start in HR, especially in the larger companies. Although this system definitely has a lot of say in when receiving candidates come in and how those are disseminated across the organization. And it has a lot of say in how and what people are brought to the table in terms of hiring. And unfortunately, it's very, very biased. And today, even the majority of employers still use a ATS system with AI technology that is like 10 to 12 years old. So you can imagine this was AI technology is trained off of what you feed it, essentially. And that means it's being fed resumes and CVs, and those resumes and CVs are the standard. It's my former job history, it's my degree or my certificate, and that's kind of it. And so that's what it knows how to read. So that's one challenge. Another challenge that we see within employers is outdated job descriptions. So as I mentioned, it doesn't only stop and start in HR, unfortunately, especially in these large companies. And what that means is an HR professional that might be the one that actually hits post on a job into an external system might not necessarily have the latest and greatest information from, let's say, a hiring manager within that organization of what they're looking for. And so many times they pull up an old, outdated job description and just go with it. And that's fine. But it does cause an issue because, again, it creates a bias when people are looking to apply for a job. I'll flip a minute and talk a little bit about this from an education perspective, because as PK mentioned, education in terms of higher education really had a very standard purpose. And it wasn't not a bad purpose. I know a lot of times we do give flack to higher education these days, but it wasn't a bad purpose. The purpose was to help give individuals the foundation for going on and succeeding in their professional life and their personal life. But a lot of times, as this sort of adjustment happened in the labor market, meaning we weren't staying at that one job for our entire career, and we were, as individuals, meant to navigate in and out of education and employment, what ended up happening was what was communicated from an education perspective wasn't actually in the same language that employers understood. And so a lot of employers have for many years, whether or not they want to admit it, have been looking for people with a certain set of skills. And yes, in many cases, they would post a job asking for a certain level degree because in their minds, they thought that that person with that degree would have a very basic set of the foundational skills that Yassi had mentioned earlier. And that communication started to cause this game of telephone, and really who was left out at the end of this but the job seeker or the student or the lifelong learner. They were having such difficulty being able to take the information that they were learning and then being able to disseminate and communicate that to employers. And so oftentimes they were the ones left out of potentially getting a job, or they were the ones left out of potentially moving up that, so-called career ladder. But some of those problems, like I said, have been going on for a long time. And I think the interesting thing about this group that we all chatted about was that we're bridging this gap of bringing together employers and educators together to have these wonderful dialogues. But that has long been very difficult because, and there are many reasons behind that, but it just happens to be one of the challenges on the table. And I just wanted to, as we kind of jump into our further discussion, throw out some of the ideas that have been cropping up, and at least that I've been working on over the years, that might give us some food for thought as we move into this discussion. I just remembered that I had one extra challenge that was COVID related that I wanted to throw in here, because this is sort of an interesting concept as we start to talk about some of these ideas that are being unearthed in the last few years. One of the additional challenges that COVID has brought to the forefront is the number of people that are leaving the workforce. And I'm not going to go into the reasons. We can definitely chat about that when we do breakouts and all that good stuff. But it is very clear that not only are a large number of women leaving the workforce, but there's also a large number of our baby boomers that are deciding to retire at this stage. And our population in general, especially in the United States, is aging. And so that means that the actual talent that we have available is diminishing. And this is causing, and maybe exacerbating, I could say, some of the other challenges that were already on the table, because now it's becoming more and more difficult. And the gap that we talk about is becoming larger and larger, because now these employers are having so much more difficulty than they ever were in filling these roles. So let me just take that to the idea session. Am I okay on time, PK? I don't want to run over mine into anyone else's. Okay, perfect. So some of the ideas that I've been working on over the years, and I'm going to start off with some of the wonderful resources that I've been working with many teams at MZ Burning Glass to put together. We started off with some actually open source free resources, because the idea that if the translation layer between this currency of the labor market was stuck at this level of just your CV and just your job description, it wasn't allowing us to really tell the true unique story of ourselves. And I thought that true unique story of ourselves was skills. And if we could actually get to that layer and describe all of the unique sets of skills that we've learned throughout our personal and professional history, be it formal education, formal work history, maybe it's I'm a working mom, so maybe it's being a mom, whatever it might be in our personal life, and that we've actually picked up a lot of skills on. How could I bring that to the forefront, and how could I also help some of these other players, the employers, the educators, also be talking in this same language? And so we ended up open sourcing a what we call the MZ Burning Glass Skills Library. And it's essentially an API technology that a lot of organizations are using to get down to that foundational layer of skills. And so essentially they're able to what I call skillify all of their content. And that means if you're an educator, you can skillify curriculum and talk that language of employers so that your students can better understand what they're learning. If you're an employer and you're trying to up your game with your job descriptions and or understand your employees internally, that gives you a lot of information to be able to do that. We also realized that there were, again, when I talk about these onion layers, there was another layer. We think of, again, typically, although an employer will talk about a job title and the skills within that job, and let's say a degree, and their assumption of what the skills of that degree might bring to the table, a lot of times the data surrounding all of this was stuck at a level that didn't also speak that language. And that was industry. We talk about ONET quite often, SOC codes in the US, although that's different around the world. But how could we also create this translation through point so that all of the data that we were receiving to make this decision could then be disseminated across all the way down to skills? So we also unleash an open source job titles library so that we could give employers just that next step to be able to better understand the information happening and within their organization.
Kelly, 1 minute.
Yes, of course. 1 minute. Okay, perfect. And there's a number of other open resources, which I'll share with you later, but I would say one of the most interesting aspects of this is then the ability to take all this information back into your organizations and I'll leave it at that. But some of the other fun stuff happening out in the market are groups like the Open Skills Network, who are then taking the understanding of these basic skills, the words of skills, and actually creating some contextual language around those skills so that, again, we can create better curriculum and better job descriptions that everyone can come together on. There is a lot of work on what most people now refer to as learning and employment records. And those are essentially like a digital wallet of everything that you've done in your history, and the idea that I could take my skills and my history with me anywhere and help that be understood. And I think the Holy Grail, which I believe our colleague from 110 will get into a bit later, is this concept of being able to match between someone's unique set of skills and potential job opportunities, and actually even fill in the gaps when there is needed education to move folks to the next level. So hopefully that gives us a little bit to go by. PK, thanks so much for the the warning on the minute. I really look forward to continuing to chat with you guys.
Kelly, thank you so much. Fascinating all-around perspective. Before we move to our next panelist, Utpal, Kelly, just one question I'm sure came in. It's kind of the elephant in the room. You talked about the applicant tracking and screening systems, AI-based, and kind of for a lot of companies extinct. But as we work with a lot of students, I notice it's becoming a cat and mouse game. Everybody's trying to figure out how to beat these systems, so it defeats the whole purpose. So what's just 30 seconds, reflect on that. I mean, are we supposed to all play this game, is that where life is headed? Or is there going to be some real intelligence in the artificial intelligence there?
Yeah, well, I mean, in all honesty, there is the latest and greatest artificial intelligence could read a book and spit back poetry. So there is artificial intelligence that is doing amazing things, and us actually updating our technologies is potentially one step. I would say in the immediate time frame, of course, individuals have to play the system as best they can because there's no immediate answer. But the other part that I would say is I do think we're actually on the precipice of our entire hiring system being upended and being replaced by this learning and employment record concept. Because again, the idea that there's a lot of talk about who owns the information about you as an individual. They want to own that information, and the idea that they can carry that with them across borders and that mean the same thing no matter where you are. You don't necessarily have to call up your school and get your transcripts or anything like that anymore. It's a whole different ballgame. I actually think that technology, as it continues to come to fruition, will take ATSs straight out of the game. I would bet on it, actually.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Well, let's move on to our next panelist, and I'm particularly grateful to Utpal Mangla. He just has been promoted to a major global role for IBM. And quite frankly, Utpal, if I was in your shoes, I'll say, hey, look, I got more important things to do than to attend to this panel. So thank you so much for still taking the time, talking to me. And I know you're based in Canada, so I hope you're not too envious of me being in California and weather being nice and everything. Over to you, Utpal.
Thank you, PK. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're good.
I am definitely jealous of you because I'm in Toronto, and obviously the weather in the Northeast is little rainy and a little cold, although the winter foliage is amazing. But I would take the California hot weather anytime in January and February. I think the comment that you and Kelly were just going into on artificial intelligence is very, very powerful, but also relevant, because I will provide the perspective from a industry, from a business standpoint, without getting too much into details. We recently had a posting for 120 positions and got 12,000 applicants. So there is no way that anybody will be able to manually go through that and look at it for over 100 positions, over 10,000 applications, right? And so AI is and becomes, or the virtual assistant becomes the initial gatekeeper, if you will, for filtering the process. And you're absolutely right, PK, that a lot of the folks do game the system. But as Kelly mentioned, AI is also getting more intelligent. We're also making sure that a lot of those models do not have biases built into it. If they do, or remove those biases and make sure that all of those are taken into consideration. So is the system perfect? No. Is there any other better way to do it? Will all be eyes and ears instead of having manual few hundred people going through those? But I'm a big believer in AI and the power of good AI and the benefit it does. So I'm sure over a period of time, those tools and technologies will become better. Let me just go to the topic over here in terms of academia, industry, skills of the future. And I do talk a lot at multiple other forums on jobs of the future. I also participate in industry forums. I see my good friend over there, Jim Sporer. He's been an amazing partner with me. I see Alex over there, Alexandra Medina. She's been amazing to us with the work that's being done with the National Science Foundation. What we are trying to do, or what I see that a lot of the companies are doing, are trying to work with the schools and institutes and make sure that those skills are put in at the undergraduate level so that when the hiring happens, the skills and talent from an industry perspective becomes inherent and part of it. So let me give an example. The data science, data scientists, people with AI skills, people with automation skills, those are some of the jobs that we see in a lot of the high-tech companies. One of the gaps that we are seeing is that people would know, or the students would know what those technologies are. Let's say they understand what AI does, what ML does, what automation does, etc., what data science does, but they lack the industry knowledge. How do I apply these skills in my industry? How do I apply these in basic financial services? How do I apply some of these things that I learn in industrial engineering on the manufacturing side? How do I apply some of the skills that I learn on the data science in terms of the telco, media, and entertainment industry, et cetera, et cetera? And one of the things that we are seeing big time is a collaboration that is happening between the universities and companies. Either it's one-on-one or it's part of a consortium to make sure that the skills also have an industry lens. Another thing which is being very proactively done, and it's a two-way street. Obviously, the companies are very, very motivated, but what they do is try to proactively build relationships with the campuses. They are proactively doing sessions. They are proactively bringing in the industry experts to help the students understand what the industry lens is, what are the various industry nuances, and how the skills that they are learning relate to a particular industry to create jobs of the future. A classic example I will give is California State University at Northridge. They have a very good accounting program, but they are proactively bringing the accounting firms to the campuses, not at the time of just hiring students, right at the beginning when the students are making decisions, right from the point the first courses start, and keep that relationship going throughout the year. I think those kind of innovative methods and techniques are very relevant. Another example is Penn State University, which in its industrial engineering program is trying to integrate a lot of the industry components as part of the curriculum. They're looking at not just purely industrial engineering from a traditional lens, they're also trying to look at it, how this can help with a data scientist in the IoT space. They're also looking at it how the manufacturing jobs using robotics will help a particular student gaining an industrial engineering degree. So I think those are the creative ways to look at it. Back to you, PK.
Well, thank you, Utpal. Very interesting. You know, I have to say this that I'm envious of all people who work for IBM because starting out after college, I got rejected by IBM. So I had never gotten over that rejection. But you know, IBM has 110 years of history of really having a strong commitment to developing people. I mean, I have huge respect for that part. So, Utpal, my question to you is that, I mean, IBM does everything with a lot of thought. There's so many smart people there. Uh, are there metrics that these kind of outreach and partnership and catch them early, are there metrics you're looking at internally to say, is this the worth the investment? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, well, by the way, I cannot turn back what happened with you, PK, but if there was any consolation, I also did not get hired by IBM directly. I was acquired. So when I joined in the late 90s, I joined one of the big four firms. And all I had to do at that time was just to spell SAP. If anybody could spell SAP, you could easily get a job. So just as you are disappointed that IBM did not hire you, at that time we used to have five big five consulting, big five accounting firms, and I spelled SAP correctly with all five of them. Four of them offered me a job. One of them did not offer me a job. So I understand your disappointment over there. But jokes apart, on a more serious note, we are a heavily metric-driven company. We sometimes metric these things to the nth level, but yes, absolutely. We measure this, we track this. We have a very dedicated university program. We look at the success rates. We look at what can be done. We also work very collaboratively with a lot of the communities, underprivileged, initiatives, etc. So we are proactively involved and measure each and everything in terms of success rate, diversity criteria, equal representation within the country, globally, etc.
Okay, thank you, Utpal. I think our next presenter, Gonzalo, is a perfect lead-in because he's been personally leading many of the programs with universities. So I think, Gonzalo, you could probably offer us a deep dive into how some of these things are working out. Over to you.
Thanks, PK. So I thought that was a pretty boss move of Kelly and Utpal there to go without slides. I didn't trust myself, so next time I'll get to that next time. So I did have some slides to try and kind of put down some thoughts here. So hopefully everyone can see them fine. PK, are you able to see the slides? Okay.
Yes, yeah, it's working.
Okay, excellent. All right, so well, good morning, good afternoon, and dare I say maybe good evening out there to all the participants. Thanks a lot for joining. Really appreciate the opportunity. I think my job here today is to be a little bit of a conduit and share with you some of the best practices around talent acquisition, recruiting, skill screening, those kind of things. So appreciate that opportunity. I'll just by way of quick introduction, my name is Gonzalo Salguero. I'm a distinguished engineer at Cisco, and I work in the office of the CTO in the customer experience engineering and product incubation team. And essentially what it means an awful lot of things. Obviously, it's an innovation-focused role, but at Cisco, a distinguished engineer has to dedicate a significant chunk of time to teaching, mentoring, growing the pipeline. So I've long had kind of a passion around early in career, and so I kind of give back, and it's my choice to do that, and there's a variety of ways that we can do that. But with a lot of university recruiting, I'll talk about some of the programs participation and different career development programs that I'm involved with, but I have a lot of research engagements with academia, et cetera. So some of the things that I kind of want to bring to bear here in this discussion. All right, so I put these slides together and they may come across a little bit as stream of consciousness. but it's just to kind of organize a few thoughts that I think were pertinent. So, but hopefully the idea here is that it drives some meaningful dialogue. So first of all, I just want to level set on how Cisco engages with universities. So we really do engage in a variety of different ways, but as you can see here, typically the level and the depth of the engagement is based on the relationship that we have with that school, right? And that's probably logical, right? But based on the specific talent needs, right? Different parts of the company, they've got different sets of schools that they target. Now, these target schools, they're assigned a priority level. And the higher the priority level, the greater the level of engagement. So higher priority schools are where we try and influence like the curriculum, where we try and provide high touch academic assistance, where we provide industry mentoring to the students, right? Those kinds of things where they're a little bit more high touch. And I'll give you just my own personal example, right? North Carolina State University is a local university here. That's one of our target schools, right? It's a great engineering school for us and a school that we're heavily engaged in. So I myself have taught something like 5 semesters of engineering and computer science senior design projects. I'm a guest lecturer there. So one of the graduate classes there, in fact, actually in IoT, uses a book I wrote on the subject. So infusing even our material into the curriculum itself, but these kinds of things. But even small things, smaller engagements like employee events or different employer events, career fairs, things like that, right? I participate in a lot of those things. But that's just me. Some of the people on my team are full-on adjunct professors there. They serve on different academic boards, right? So my point being is that the time commitment and the level of engagement at those target schools is very high. Okay, and at Cisco, our talent acquisition strategy varies pretty dramatically from professional hires to new grads. But one thing, something that's an undisputed fact and that I was lucky enough to be a part of, is the incredible success that we've had with our co-op and internship programs. So this try before you buy model, that really works for us. Our co-ops have not only gone on to be better engineers and perform better, immeasurably better, but on average, they even stay longer. So the retention is better. So it's world class from that perspective. We've really proven this out over many cohorts. I was able to lead a few of the cohorts of one of the co-op programs that we have. Obviously, there's many around the company, and the results were dramatic. It really was. So with the success that we've had with co-op, and that's kind of really impacted our recruiting strategy, whereby now we prioritize schools with well-designed and really industry-friendly co-op and internship programs. I'll give you an example. I've been making a lot more frequent recruiting trips to Boston to recruit at Northeastern University because, and some of you may be familiar with their sort of multi-semester co-op program, but it's really comprehensive. It's really, it's very good and it's very industry friendly. So that's an area where we've kind of shifted our recruiting focus. Another focus really from the experiential learning that we see that kind of cascades down to everything we do is even the in-house academy program that we run for new hires. It used to be very much 3 months of primarily lectures and theory to teach them all about networking and kind of the bits and bytes there, and then expect them to hit the ground running. And that just wasn't a good model. And over the last 2 or 3 years now, we've really been focused much more on essentially working on doing your eventual day job, right? Shadowing, something like in the medical profession, but really doing a watered down version of your day job. And we're finding engineers perform much better taking an experiential approach that way. And by the way, I just think it's worth noting there, it just caught my eye there, that where it says big company recruiting problems there on that last slide, I'm really referring there to a problem, and it's an ongoing problem for us, but essentially it's different parts of the company cannibalizing talent from each other because there's a large talent profile overlap. So I think there's an opportunity, and maybe this is something that we can have a discussion about later, but where we can be a bit more granular about the skills and how different orgs look at it, right? I think the level of granularity is something that could be important. Okay, so let me shift gears very quickly here and just say a few words here about skills, how we screen for them, and what that process looks like at Cisco, which I think is interesting. So there's a group at Cisco, and it's called Students at Work. And essentially that's to convey that it's ongoing education. But the Students at Work group is responsible for the development, the technical curation, the availability of ongoing training, education, skills maintenance across the enterprise. So they have a mission, and you can see it there, but it's really to ensure that Cisco employees continually evolve and adapt their skill set so that they're always relevant, always in demand, always aligned to the company's forward-looking technical strategy. And that's a challenge, and that's something that's an ongoing process for us. And one of the programs that we've implemented here over the last year or two is this working with the Students at Work team, where they've developed a new comprehensive model to not only determine what technical skills are relevant to different segments of the company, but they've also outlined a curation and maintenance plan to continually evaluate the freshness, the relevance of those identified skills. And at the heart of this model is this, what you see there on the slide, Technical Advisory Board, of which I'm a part of. And that is made up of senior technical leaders that are strategically selected from across the company to provide insights on the top technical skills needs and their relative priorities. But that Technical Advisory Board, it not only acts as champions and sponsors, but since it's such a senior group, they use their considerable influence and industry reach to connect, as needed, obviously, relevant subject matter experts with this Students at Work team to deliver scalable, but really bespoke training solutions that are customized to meet the specific needs of the Cisco technical community. And how do we do this? At a high level, we make this happen through an always-on technical curation model. And it's guided and reinforced with continuous data collection and measurement. So at a high level, you can see, we'll start here with the blue arrow, with the skills and learning data that's brought to the Technical Advisory Board. Now, this data is based on our internal priorities and alignment, but it's also fed by external industry insights and trends. The outcome from this is those key skill areas where we need to focus our training, our upskilling. So then, as you can see there, we move a little bit to the consulting phase, right, where the Technical Advisory Board connects the Students at Work team, like I mentioned, but with those subject matter experts from the different business entities from across the company. Now, that partnership is where you really dig into what are the scale development needs for that? What are the goals? What should these training solutions tackle? What should they look like? This is where all that's at. And then there's a development phase. This is where we put all of that into practice. Now, bear in mind that this development process is ongoing. It's not called out specifically, but we're continuously partnered with those technical teams, continually making decisions about whether this requires us to modify or expand an existing solution, or whether we need to create a set of new solution offerings entirely. Now, this constant cycle of review and feedback is ever present, and it's guiding those decisions. And then lastly, as you can see there with that red arrow, that's where we launch and measure, right? So this is where we'll launch a solution offering for a particular scale area. We'll immediately measure, a lot like what Paul said there, right? We're heavy on the measurement and metrics, but we'll immediately measure the impact of, through a variety of different tools and surveys. Obviously, got to have those. But this data feeds back into the cycle, and it continues. And this process can iterate any number of times during a fiscal year. But in my mind, the secret to success here is that always-on model, that continuous measurement and data analysis, and the fact that it's cross-functional and even industry-based, where we're bringing other industry insights into our skills determinations. But let me just be clear here, though, when I say a solution offering, I'm not typically just talking about a point offering like an instructor-led course. A lot of times we're talking about carefully curated, rich learning pathways, really. Such as those that you found. I don't know if you're familiar with Degreed, but they're great at this. But it's really, so recently we went through this exercise where we made a huge move to upskill our entire technical community in all things cloud, right? And this included things like cloud development and architectures, containers and microservices, cloud security, DevOps, site reliability engineering, on and on and on, right? But this resulted in a fabulous cloud curriculum that we did on Degreed that was made up of coursework, videos, labs, articles, sample tests, etc. So with that, I'll just close and just say that this is a new process, and we've been doing this only for the past year and a half or two. So we're still obviously working out a lot of kinks. But what I will say is that a big one for me, and one that maybe we can have a discussion about, is having a full mesh system in place that we're able to have a feedback loop into and out of the hiring and recruiting team to ensure that we're always hiring in support of those relevant skills, that we're working so hard to maintain at Cisco, but also making sure that we're properly cross-pollinating back out to our relevant, DIP partner schools, and ensure that those skills that are so important to us, that they're properly reflected in the curriculum. So with that, PK, I'll stop. I think I'm at time. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Gonzalo. Fascinating perspective, by the way, very ground. What we should do is that I speak as an academician here, is that we should take your presentation and Utpal's presentation, make TikTok videos and make it a required reading or required watching for all university administrators. I mean, you make it sound so simple, and from the university side, all these things look like daunting challenges. So Gonzalo, there's one question that is in the chat that kind of makes sense for a lot of people, and that is that, and very, very briefly, 1 minute, what makes a good target school? When you look for a school, you're working with North Carolina State, you're working with Northeastern, who wouldn't you work for? I mean, I don't want to take a glass half empty, but so what's a good target here? What makes them industry friendly enough?
Yeah, and that's not an easy question, to be honest with you. I mean, because, and I only say that because our landscape of target schools is continually evolving, right? So for example, I mentioned Northeastern. That's really, that emphasis has happened in the last few years. It's really through trial and error. There are certain schools. So for example, like Northeastern, that's one you and I have talked about, PK. That's one where we've had employees that are from there that have brought to our attention, hey, listen, you should check out, they've got a really comprehensive co-op program there that's really based on industry and experiential learning. And so it was just really we tried it out. It was one of those things. And when we started seeing that we had some success there, then we started making kind of the big investment in those schools. And so it's a dynamic landscape. It's constantly changing. What I will tell you, though, that in the time that I've been at Cisco 25 years. In the time that I've been there, I can tell you that there has been a noticeable shift from, big time R1 schools, that are very focused on theory and very focused on research, to really more of schools that have a little bit more industry-friendly approach. So that's something that we have seen. Identifying what those schools are exactly, that's not trivial. Some of it's word of mouth, to be honest.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Okay, let's move on to our next panelist. So I think you would agree that when I think of Sukhandana, my first reaction is that I want to be like that someday, where you already sought fame, glory, whatever else, and then you're making social impact in this dimension. And social impact on a scale. I mean, oftentimes when we think of social impact for a lot of nonprofits, it's 5 people, 10 people. And I mean, it's just an incredible story of what Sukhandana is leading here. So Sukhandana, I'll just turn it over to you to tell the story.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah, you good.
Great. This is Sukhandana coming to you from Pittsburgh today. I wanted to first give a quick shout out to Martha Russell. She's on the line. Hi, Martha. Martha and I worked together at Stanford a little bit on some, and I'll tell you a little bit of my background. So thanks for the kind introduction. I don't know about the word glory and everything you said, but I will definitely say, when people think about their jobs, they think about the best job, they think about dream job. I now have a role that I call, I'm on a life's calling. I'm working on something that I get to contribute, leveraging all my experiences, my life background, all my skills to a mission, to a cause that I'm super excited and proud of. Prior to joining 110, which I'll talk a lot about today, I spent most of my career in corporate America, Fortune 50, Fortune 500. And while I was, spending all of my life in HR technology, the human capital space, really intersecting where the future work, future of talent's gonna be. This is where I spend a lot of time in academia, specifically with Martha Russell, who's on the line with Stanford, through an organization called Media X, where how the academia and corporation work together to enable both performance and productivity for a workforce. Then I had a privilege of taking some sabbaticals, taking some time off during COVID, believe it or not. I was lucky to forecast that I needed to take some real time off, really focus on community, really focus on my purpose in life. And I did that. And towards the end of that, my sabbatical, I got a call from this organization called 110, which I'll share a couple slides on it and tell you a little bit about it. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
Yeah. So 110 is a nonprofit. 110 has one simple mission. The mission is in 10 years, we will hire, upskill, advance 1 million Black talents into family sustaining job by inspiring, influencing skill-based hiring by corporation. So it's a simple mission, but there's a lot packed into it. 1 million, that's where the one comes from. In 10 years, that's the 10. To create, upscale, advance 1 million Black talent to family sustaining job without 4-year college degree by inspiring, influencing corporation to do skill-based hiring. So the context for it is, and I'll talk more about how we arrived to that. But before I do that, this one was established last December. We're almost approaching our 1-year anniversary. It was founded by 5 prominent CEO of the United States. Ken Frazier was the CEO and chairman of Mark, Ginny Rometty, who was the chairman and CEO of IBM, Ken Chanal, who's now is a partner at General Catalyst, was the CEO chairman of Amex, Charles Phillip, who's the board of Amex now, but was the CEO of N4, and Kevin Sher, who was the CEO and chairman of Amgen. These are 5 founding CEO to say that through employer, through private sector, we should be able to, solve one of the many challenging issues in our country, especially around income equality. And the best way to solve it is through jobs, through creating these family sustaining jobs. And while they're looking at the data set, and by the way, as I mentioned, this is a all employer led, the CEO led. Some of our colleagues on the line from Cisco and IBM, they are part of the coalition. I'll talk about the coalition in a second. You can see, some of the largest companies in the United States are part of the coalition, and the number is growing. We have about close to 60 employers now, and that number is going to keep growing. But if you look at and we talked a little bit about ATS system earlier. We talked a lot about some of the antiquated systems that some of the employer has. But I'll share you 2 data points. On paper, if you look at the most jobs in the United States, pick a number. Let's say the jobs that pays more than $60,000 and higher. On paper, it requires 4-year college degree. If you look at a $40,000 job and higher, United States, on paper, it requires 4-year college degree. On the flip side, 66% American has no college degree. If you look at the number specifically for Black talents, age 25 and higher, 76% of no college degree. So the way we're going about it is college degree, college academy is definitely one important pathway, but there's another pathway, which is all about skill-based hiring, skill-based education, skill-based hiring. And that's what 110 is all about. We are building a coalition where employers, talent developer, which is the organization that does all the credentialing, the training, and community leader come together where we can cultivate and develop an ecosystem that can upskill talent, as well as we can do job placement at scale based on skills. So that's 110 is all about. And if we talk about the notion of our goal, if you look at the way that most organizations have job description, if you look at really, and some of our coalition members like IBM and others have done it for a decade, where most of their job doesn't require college degree, but having the infrastructure in place for many, many decades, it's been a practice. So we are now working with all employers who are in a coalition through we call COP, community of practices, that they can learn from each other. They can learn some of the best practices they have, so that the skill-based hiring, skill-based requisition, skill-based training becomes a norm. And that's how we believe that we're gonna reach our goal. On the flip side, when you look at these jobs, I talked a little bit about the family sustaining part of it, which is where we just look at MIT living wage index. That's one of the criteria the employer, how they select the jobs. It needs to meet those thresholds. In average, it's 58,000 and higher, if you look across the country based on the location. We also look at the jobs that has less risk of being automated, and as well as the job does not require more than 5-year experience. So we're looking at a mid-skill, mid-level job, so they are both attractive and accessible for our talent. So that's if you think about our ecosystem, it's a three-sided marketplace. The employer who are creating opportunity, changing their hiring practices more skill-based, as well as creating a community of practices so that they can inspire each other to solve this. On the flip side, we have what we call another side of the marketplace, which is the talent developer. These are the organization online, as well as local and national, does all the credentialing, the training. We just use the phrase talent developer. Some of them you may be very much familiar with. Flatiron School or 2U or Udacity, or other organizations like Guild. So we are putting together this disjointed ecosystem into one place. And ultimately, our goal is really create this ecosystem, a three-sided marketplace for a talent who's ready for a job based on the skills they have. They can find it because our job is really matching the skills, supply and demand. Another pathway is they want to have a job but doesn't have the right skill. We will use the talent developer to do the upskilling. On the flip side, while they are going through upskilling, they need any support, wraparound services like childcare and other services. We are connecting with those resources, because then our goal is ultimately they get the job, which is a family sustaining job. And this, it's not just getting the job, it's getting the family sustaining job, because that's how you're going to have wealth. That's how you're going to be able to buy a house, put your kids to school, and really one for all, go to finish that income in mobility and reach that American dream. So that's 110. Now back to the skill-based hiring. This technology, the ecosystem we're developing, it is some of the things maybe Callie was talking about. We are making sure that when employer creating the job, based on job description, based on the job requirement, technology now is so sophisticated that it can infer the skills that is needed. On the flip side, talent resume may not always be accurate, or they can always make it up, but based on their job, their talent profile, based on where they work, based on what location they work, or what the colleagues were. Now technology is so sophisticated, it can also infer the true skills a talent has. Then what we use a technology, it does the skill matching between the supply and demand, and that's how we're able to show that talent how close to they are to a job they're applying based on their skill. On the flip side, when an employer put a job out there, they would find the top 5, top 10 talent that has the closest match to that job they're open. And that's how we're leveraging technology, leveraging the skill-based approach to do job placement, and as well as upskilling at scale. So that's 110. And this is where all my previous background of running large technology function and spending all my life in HR technology, leveraging those skills, leveraging those experiences, building out this one mega platform that will provide upskilling and job placement at scale for all over the country in the United States. So PK, I'll pause. That's okay. A little bit about 110, that little bit of the approach we take. and a little bit about how skill-based hiring could really solve one of the challenges we have as a society, income equality, and how 110 is tackling that.
Thank you, Sukhandana. Fascinating. You know, the scale, I mean, as I said earlier, the scale of how you're approaching this. So, Sukhandana, the question I have is that two-part question. One is that, well, are you on track towards reaching that goal? But more importantly, what are some of the barriers you're facing?
Yeah, great question. We intentionally call 110 110, meaning 10 years. This is going to be a long road. We're having early success. Even in our first year, we track 20,000 hires and promotion in our coalition members that I mentioned. So we are up to a great start. We know this is a long road. This is a long game because it's really requiring systematic changes in all the employers that I talked about. The challenge for us that we're very much cognizant of, what I would call the change management within each of the company. That's why leveraging the power of IBM, who has done it for a decade, company like Cisco, who gets it, right? So we're going to leverage the learning and experiences from some of our coalition member who are in a different spectrum in the journey to the other side of the spectrum where they're not so there yet. What I'm very encouraged by, this is CEO-led. Any coalition member that joins 110, it's the top of the house. They're the ones signing up for it. And they're assigning their CHRO, they're assigning their team to be part of the coalition. So it's very inspiring, very encouraging to know that we are in the right track. But this is going to be, as we say, it's not 1-1, it's 110.
Thank you, Sukhandana. Fascinating, absolutely. I know many of you are asking questions in the chat, and we're going to save those questions, keep ticklers. We'll have plenty of time to talk later on. So finally, we sort of bring a perspective from the startup world, so to speak. Not quite really startup, but it really contrasts how different target universities are approaching education differently and how they align with having people who can sort of say hit the ground running when they come to work. So Dave, take it from there. Unmute, Dave.
All right, I'm on. So I can
Yes, you're
share
on.
my screen. I'm going to hit the share.
Mhm.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I am going to do a slideshow. So I'm not sure exactly how to play from current slide. Okay, there we go. All right, so thank you very much for the opportunity to join this amazing group and engage in the discussion today. So I think I have something a little bit different to share. It's more of an observation from my life. I'm not part of a large organization like IBM or Cisco. So I'm going to start briefly with what my story is, and then bring up some points for discussion and maybe raise some questions at the end. So to begin with, I've put these two pictures of UC Berkeley, where I attended university, and Cal Poly, and I'm going to explore the difference in my observation between a university degree and a degree from a technical school like Cal Poly. So I always wanted to be an architect. I was attracted to the integration of art and science. It was that specific point that influenced my decision for my own career. Now, when I was a student at Berkeley, there was a very strong focus on theoretical education, as if everybody was going to go into research level work, as opposed to working in the workforce. Now, given that there are like 40,000 students at UC Berkeley, they're not all going to go into research. but all of our education was oriented that way. And it focused on concepts and it focused on presentation. It did not focus very much on content. And I can say I took the one class I took there that was most beneficial was a class to do something called construction documents. So those are like the blueprints that you would see on a building site. That class has been discontinued. I think that they considered that it was too practical. It wasn't at a university level. Now it happened that while I was at Berkeley, I studied 1 year abroad. And in England, architecture was considered to be more of a vocational activity. And so it was in a polytechnic university in London. And I learned there the type of things that I imagine that students learned at Cal Poly. We went into detail about how to build things in brick. And we had field trips to construction sites and things like that. That was not part of my education at Berkeley. So I got a glimpse of what it was like. Unfortunately, we don't do brick construction here, particularly in California. So it wasn't very relevant to my practice. It was just eye-opening in terms of the type of education that other students were receiving outside of the University of California. So I started working right after my undergraduate degree, as many architects do, and many of them, in fact, don't progress to a master's degree. So this is maybe a little bit unlike some other professions like law or medicine, but I see that it is somewhat similar to a lot of the staff I see coming into my startup, which are computer science undergraduate degree holders from UC Berkeley, and they may or may not go on to graduate school. They just jump right into practice. I worked for a couple years, then I returned to grad school and I worked in the profession for 30 years. And I completed landmark projects like the ones you see here, and I mentored dozens of junior architects. So now I'm with Geopogo down there in the bottom right corner. I'm a patented inventor and I lead a software company, Geopogo, and we develop 3D visualization tools for designing construction with a focus on AR. So I'm representing a small employer. I'm not a large employer like Cisco or IBM. We don't have an expert HR team. We don't have a wonderful co-op program like the one that Gonzalo shared. And we don't have the power to drive systemic change. However, the systemic status quo impacts us. So I welcome this opportunity to participate in the discussion and hopefully improve the systems of training to workforce. So here I'm going to share something which is from a journal called Design Intelligence. And these are rankings that are prepared every year in an industry survey of professionals. So these are the top schools as ranked for an architecture degree. And I have highlighted 4 of the top 10, which are technical education here. You do not see a UC Berkeley on this list. In fact, UC Berkeley is not in the top 40 of undergraduate architecture programs. So one of my questions is like, what's wrong with this? And so, I mean, it's true that not all university or not all higher education has to be focused on professional practice. But the truth is, no matter what school you go to, that is probably what you will end up doing. And if you look at the idea that a student coming from high school is going to try to get admission to a university, probably if they can, because they consider that a better education, then the students who are judged by higher education to be better applicants are going to schools like UC Berkeley, and they want to be architects, but they're not being trained to be architects. And I think that that's probably true for a lot of other occupations that are represented by the other companies in this discussion. I think that there might be a bias within our universities against what might be considered as vocational training. So it's considered to be preferable, a higher order, to be in something that's conceptual and, theoretical, and it's a lower calling to be doing something which is vocational. So like Iqbal said, industry knowledge is key. And Iqbal, I heard you call out Northridge State University and Penn State. So why can't UCLA and UPenn also stand out as much, if not more? So I have some questions here. The first one is about what's a good mix of theoretical and practical education. My sense is that universities are fall short in this area. They're preparing people for research occupation rather than occupation or practice. The second one is if universities don't provide enough practical training, then what's the cost and consequence to employers like IBM and Cisco who have to provide more on-the-job training? It's kind of like they're externalizing the cost of training, whereas you would hope that higher education was undertaking the responsibility for that. And then the final one is if more talented students are being admitted to university programs and drawn away from professional practice into academia or other applications of their talents, how does this impact the workforce? Like in architecture, many of the students who go to UC Berkeley don't end up becoming architects because they don't get trained to be architects. They go and they work for Pixar or something like that. And of course, I think that's unfortunate for society. So that's what I have to share. And I know we're going to go straight into questions here. So I hope it was helpful to raise some. Thank you.
Dave, thank you so much, bringing from the startup world and from the world that sort of more has to react to the marketplace as opposed to driving the marketplace like large companies can. So my question is that now that you have this experience and you're seeing design rankings, let's create a perfect candidate where, day two, once they're past the onboarding, they're productive. That's just the idea, let's say. So in
Yeah.
terms of these Cal Polys of the world and tech schools, how close are they reaching that ideal? I mean, you still have to go through significant professional onboarding, not just the HR onboarding, or what are you seeing out there? I mean, how close they're getting to being the perfect supply chain, so to speak?
Well, I mean, I think at least in the Bay Area here where I practice, Cal Poly is seen as being, as good as it gets. They do get theoretical and conceptual training, but they can also hit the ground working right away.
Oh, that's good. That's great. Yeah. So there are models out there that. So let's do this. Thanks, Dave. That's fascinating to really bring a perspective, just sort of the free market perspective in this thing. By the way, some of you people have asked questions in the chat of the panelists. So do feel free to answer those directly in the chat because some may or may not apply. They're very targeted to specific items. Let's go into a Q&A phase. I have a few questions just to get warmed up, but be thinking of your questions. We still have about another 25 minutes, so we've got plenty of room for back and forth. But I would like our panelists to think brief when you respond to the questions. I want to get a lot of questions out there, and I want to invoke the French philosopher Pascal, mathematician Pascal, who said, "Sorry about writing this long letter, but I didn't have enough time to write a short letter." So just keep that in mind as you respond to these questions. So let's start with Dave's point of view, and not all panelists have to respond to all questions if you feel you contribute. But the first one is, I guess I speak as a R1 university, if that's a designation of research one university. It's a systemic thing. They're supposed to produce researchers. I mean, that's the 100-year history of universities. So in some ways, if you take some of the more traditional faculty, I feel like playing with the industry is a dirty word. You are kind of polluting yourself with practicality, so to speak, or not pure thinking. How do we bring about this? And I know there's no this or that. I mean, how do you provide the kind of balancing act in this thing? Advise, since most of you represent industry or being in the middle, what would you tell a chancellor of a university or my boss or somebody like that? What should they do?
I mean, I'll just throw out one to begin with, is that in professional practice, in architecture, you use certain software. The dominant software in architecture is Autodesk, which is in 2D, it's in AutoCAD, and in 3D, it's in Revit. There are other types of software that are just as good to use in school. They don't use those. They use more of what I would call a rendering software, like Rhino or something. And so I think that if students use that software, at least in one or a couple of their classes, then it wouldn't be completely foreign to them when they started working. There's a gap. So you try and close the gap a little bit. That's just an example.
Okay. Kelly, I know you and I spoke on this issue, but maybe could you share your perspective?
Sure, happy to. I mean, I have a lot of respect for R1 universities and the types of people that they're training. I think, if I was to have a conversation with a chancellor at one of those universities, I would say that, the thing is there are so many alternatives. Sukhandana had mentioned some of those stats on folks that do not have bachelor's degree. It is a bachelor's degree or above, I should say. It is a large percentage in this country. COVID has also cut off a lot of the talent that was coming across borders into those types of universities. So I really do think that from an innovation perspective, it is just a fantastic idea to not, only consider continuing with tradition and to maybe think a little bit outside of the box. It does not actually take away from what you're doing at a research institution. I think it's actually enhancing, creating, some of the partnerships that all the other folks on this call have mentioned.
Thank you, Kelly. That's a good point. Okay, so I'm gonna have one more question, then be ready with your questions and comments and all that. So I think if you look at the systemic social change that's going on, it's just phenomenal. I mean, I think it was Vladimir Lenin who said that for decades nothing happens, and then within a few weeks, decades happen. And I think in some ways that's the kind of moment that we are living in. And I think those to me can be summed up in three alphabets, DEI. And Sukhandana, you are leading the parade, your organization leading the parade, but I'm more curious about Utpal, looking from the IBM perspective, Gonzalo from a Cisco perspective. How are you factoring all this and really be part of the progressive force in this very systemic structural change that's taking place?
Yeah, this is Utpal. I can answer it here. The fact that we have Sukhandana representing 110, and the fact that IBM is one of the core founding member answers the question. So I think you've given me a softball here, PK. And I know you and I did not talk about it, but it's just an amazing example here where IBM is one of the core founding members of the 110 initiative. Also, there are multiple other things like the PTech Foundation, which a team focuses on, and I know Sukhandana is nodding his head. By the way, Sukhandana and I have never met before.
That's
so
right.
Just for the benefit of all, this is not rehearsed, but there's another PTech Foundation that IBM is very actively involved in. And as I said, this is just one of the many initiatives. There are significant other diversity, geopolitical, global pieces that we actively look at and promote in different countries, because different countries all across the globe have different dynamics to what their local issues are. So I think just the fact that we have representation from 110 is a classic example of the work that our company is doing.
Thank you, Gonzalo. I know Cisco is also a member, but I'm sure there's
Yeah,
a lot of other things going on that.
there really is, PK, and you know, it's something that cascades top to bottom. So we see it end to end. I wouldn't expect everybody to know this, of course. So I mean, I'm happy to share, but there is a certain level of social awareness at Cisco as far as these things, kind of these sort of social evils that we really need to try and rectify. And there's a lot of effort and emphasis put on this, and it's not just, you know, race or gender or, you know, global, whether global, but I mean, even, and I myself have been a part of a couple of different inclusion programs where it's, you know, recruiting underrepresented groups. We have a program known as, one is CTIP, another one's VTIP, but essentially what it boils down to is, you know, dedicated hiring, and if I'm being candid, advantageous hiring for veterans, for example, right? And I can, that's a group, for example, that maybe doesn't make it on some of the underrepresented, but we've had a lot of success in that program, right? We're trying to give veterans a chance at, you know, maybe jobs that might be difficult otherwise. So, you know, kind of shining a spotlight on some of those things. So, yeah, everything. I can tell you that, for example, another thing is all employees are, it's mandatory to take, like, for example, diversity, diverse panels, diverse interviewing panels, and bias training for when you're doing interviewings or interacting with different recruiting arms at Cisco. So, you know, for me, I see this as really across the board, and it's something that's very top of mind right now at Cisco.
Thank you. And before, since I threw this teaser out there in the beginning, before we turn it over to your questions, I want to impose impromptu on Catherine here to just take a minute and talk about what you did for the oil and gas industry that was so pioneering.
Okay. So what we found was that when we were hiring in the service company that I worked for, many of our hires were quite knowledgeable on all the subjects, engineering, geology. But when it came with how to deal with the clients, with how to get their ideas across, with how to think, they didn't have that type of knowledge. So we wanted, and that's something that our clients were paying for. They were paying for that type of delivery. And if you're just kind of doing on-the-job training, it takes a while to learn that type of interactions with your client. It takes a while to know what your client really needs. So we created a fast-track training program to kind of get them up to speed. It worked out very well. But, you know, as a service company, and a lot of service companies out there too, you know, you're always just interested in kind of the dollar value of all this. And I think that's where, after a while, it lost its benefit when I'm taking people away for 6 months at a time when they could be making money, and instead you're spending money to have to make them a better employee. But for the time that it worked, it really worked out well. And I still see all of my students out there and how they have really grown in their career from this initial training that we did.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting cost benefit perspective. That's what I liked about what Catherine was talking, that it's not just about doing the right thing, the right hires, but the metric, you know, that it pays. Okay, so folks, my cup is running over. I mean, I'm saturated, my mind is racing. So I'm done being a moderator. So I'm going to ask all of our participants to be the moderator here, target a question towards the individual panelists, throw it at all of them. So your turn. Okay, we can all just be quiet here if nobody speaks up. Okay, Martha. Yeah, you can use the raise hand function or
Yeah,
whatever.
let me
Just
unmute myself and ask a question. I love the ideas that you've shared, and I love the sense that you're in the fast lane in moving ahead with these. And it does seem that the time cycles for the feedback loops in the business community and in the education communities are different. And I'm wondering if any of the panelists have some recommendations for bridging those different time cycles in the feedback loops across them. Thank you.
I'd be happy to jump in on that, Martha. I can say from the educational perspective, a lot of the really innovative higher education institutions that I've worked with over the years do use real-time labor market data to stay up to speed on what's going on in the market so that they can make slight adjustments as to major programmatic changes along the way. Sometimes that doesn't mean that they're completely, able to go as quickly as industry would like, but at least they are able to move faster than they wouldn't with that type of information. And I do know a ton of, I would say collaborations between industry and higher education in which they just try to bridge that communication gap so that there can be a constant, this is what we're seeing from our data perspective. Can you verify that as we continue to move forward?
thank you, Tilly.
So if I can just clarify, you're saying that some of the services that are now available, such as the one that you represent, help to serve as that bridge.
Exactly.
Thank you, Martha. Jim, you're always known for asking, Jim Spurr, you're always known for asking hard questions. So put our panelists to test here, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm getting some feedback or an echo. Let me see if I can figure out what's causing it. I'll just try to be brief, even though I'm getting some feedback. Gonzalo, you mentioned some pretty interesting statistics about interns getting converted, I think 87% or something.
I remember at
IBM
called the statistics are similar.
We have a very good conversion rate of interns to employees.
Sorry, Jim, we have a feedback. I'm not sure.
I think there's two audio streams open, Jim. I think like one, either the call-in user or the other one needs to be muted.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
So yeah, I'm just thinking that, that to me was one of the things that really stood out about getting, best practices for getting the right skills is bring people in as interns. And I'm just wondering if any of the panelists have ideas about what could be done to increase that. I know there is a cost associated with bringing interns in. The UK, though, has like a 1% tax apparently, and Germany does very well. And I think Denmark, everybody can get an internship. Every single student gets an internship. So what do the panelists think about programs that would just increase the number of internships? I'd love to get some thoughts on that.
I mean, I'll jump in early simply because, I brought it up, and if it was something that was, a subtle improvement, then sure. But it's dramatic. If we compare, new hires that didn't come out of an internship program versus new hires that did come out of it, the level of success across almost every metric that we measure is considerably better. And I think that there has to be something around, obviously, that experiential learning, right? But it's one thing to come out of school and think about, okay, these are places that I want to work, or this is the general field I want to work in. But it's an entirely different thing to work in a field. And for example, at Cisco, we're very open to giving co-ops an extraordinarily large level of responsibility, one that I think in a lot of cases for them outsizes their expectations. Like we'll commonly say, okay, you're the responsible person for either committing this module to this tool that you've been assigned to, or where they're the entire, and they're being held accountable, and just in sort of those debriefs when we used to run the co-op program, or when I used to lead the co-op program, there was a lot of discussions around, they would share their feelings on, wow, this isn't what I was expecting. I was expecting to come in, somebody would tell me, give me some menial task to go achieve, and it's nothing like that. So I think that it's a little bit obviously on the industry partner, but if you hold someone accountable and give them, adult-sized responsibilities, they get a real idea of what it means to work there, what, the work environment, what it means to ask for help, what, the tool sets that are available to them. I think that the sort of the spectrum of things that they see kind of open their eyes to, okay, so this really is what a job here would be like. And a lot of times, and for example, we have multiple semesters of co-ops. A lot of times we'll see after one semester, there'll be people that say, it's not for me. I love it. You guys have been great, but this isn't for me. And so we amicably end the relationship there. But we know that, for example, if somebody comes back for a second or even a third semester of co-op, they obviously are enjoying the work and the company.
Okay, thank you, Gonzalo. Sukanta, so the follow-up for Jim's question, to what extent your skilling programs are experiential?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I'll piggyback on what Gonzalo was saying. When you have a project-based training, when you are learning as a cohort basis, what we have found, talent enablement, it's way faster. So we partner with organization that not only doing upskilling, putting the talent into a project-based, cohort-based simulation or situation. Then when they're placed to the job, they are way more successful. They are way more productive from day one. So it is, there are companies like Pivotal Lab, comes to my mind, Ravatar. Pivotal Lab really pairs talent with each other. They work on a project together. This feedback, helping each other in a live project. Ravatar is one of the partners that we're talking to. They provide this 12 weeks, training acceleration, and all real based on experiential learning and cohort-based learning. That provides such acceleration to productivity and also real life learning that is pivotal to our success. So similar philosophy, I think it is becoming a standard now.
We're having a lot of fun, but I'm also watching the clock, and all good things must come to an end. So we got 5 minutes left. What I want to do is that as a takeaway, I will ask each one of my panelists to just kind of take 1 minute, honest 1 minute, and just sort of based on your learning, your observations, your presentations, just give our audience and all of us your takeaways that you would like to offer. 3 bullet points, 4 bullet points. So I'm going to go in reverse order. So ask Dave to go first.
Okay, thank you. One thing that comes to my mind is that a very strong bridge between training in school and practice in work is to have some kind of a work opportunity while you're a student. And that's very haphazard as it is. Some schools have that as a program for every student. Some schools don't cover that. And I think it's important for everyone. And I think it's also important for employers to be creating those opportunities, because there has to be those opportunities in order for students to be placed. So that's my final thought.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Sukanta?
Yeah, thanks everybody. The world of work, the future of work, the skill we need today versus 3 years from now is changing exponentially. So my both insights or reflection or learning from this group is 3 things. Forget the status quo. how we did things 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We have to let go the status quo. Second thing is collaboration. Collaboration, academia, corporation, nonprofit, we all have to come together to really, really solve the big problem. And the last and not the list is really, really provide opportunity, provide the moment of lift. We as a citizen, we as a citizen of our community, our state, our city, we have now an immense opportunity to provide our fellow citizen a moment of lift. And that's all we all need to tackle some of the larger challenges we have as a country. So those are the three takeaways from me.
Thank you, Sukhandana. Gonzalo?
Thanks, PK. So in summary, I think I'd say that, and a little bit going back to what I brought up, I think experiential learning is key. Right? We kind of proven that out, at least from some of the co-op programs that I've been a part of. So I think that should be an area of focus. I think another area of focus is active skills curation, governance, having a model where we not only have, we more or less understand quite well what the skills are needed by a particular company, but I don't know that we do a good job of maintaining that. I think that things get stale, and I don't think we do a good job of communicating that back out to academia. So I think there's an opportunity there. And then lastly, I wonder, I'm seeing a lot of, and some of it is because of where I sit, but I see a lot of industry involvement in academia. And I kind of gave some practical examples of things that we're doing and that I see directly. But I wonder if there isn't an opportunity for that to be reversed, if there's a reverse co-op opportunity, right? In the same way that, for example, we give faculty, say, residency opportunities. Is there some opportunity for industry to maybe be a part and be brought into academia so that there's a better cross-pollination of ideas and techniques? Because I think that especially now, as we're moving forward, there's a lot of areas that are very research focused. Things around AI, even automation, quantum computing, there's a huge overlap there that there could be a big partnership between academia and industry. I just think we need to explore it bidirectionally.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Utpal?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the panelists have mentioned a lot of the very important and critical points. Some of them may be just repetitive, but in the theme of 3 key points, I echo what Gonzalo said. The collaboration with universities and academia from an industry standpoint is very, very critical. It is very relevant, very important. Number 2, change is constant. We have to accept change. We have to let go the status quo. And then the third one is personal engagement. Nobody's going to do it. Think of yourself as leading it. Be personally involved, be personally engaged, be motivated, and track and measure progress. Thank you.
Kelly, you get the final minute.
Well, there's not a lot to add to those wonderful takeaways, but I will add at least one more because I am in agreement with everything you all have said. The one thing that I've taken away from this, from all of you discussing, from your perspectives, is that I think it was very clear that not the same thing works for every organization, and it's always fun to see that really, right up front, and with 3 separate organizations right here, and the idea that one thing is going to solve a problem, it is never going to be the case. And so I think for us to say that there are many ways that we can tackle this, and to keep pushing in those many different directions, and also to just, learn from each other, from that collaboration standpoint, the idea that what is working at one organization, maybe you want to try that on. And the idea also, I would say, just to echo one of the other thoughts, which was, to continue to innovate. And I push that on the higher education side, because again, higher education is not the only education alternative any longer. And if innovation is stuck in that, it's just natural for things to sort of fall away. And I would think that, I do believe that would be a huge shame.
Thank you, Kelly. So just my final 30 seconds. So my panelists, Kelly, Utpal, Gonzalo, Sukhandana, Dave, Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for preparing for this. And thank you for making me look dull. That's important. Let you know. And then again, on behalf of all five, six of us, all of you participated. Thanks for taking the time. And finally, thanks to ISSIP for providing this opportunity for extending the thought leadership on the future of work. It's been a great, I hope it's been a learning experience for all of you. So back to you, Yasi.
Thank you so much, PK. Thank you, Gonzalo, Dave, Kelly, Sukanta, Utpal. A fantastic panel. Now we'll take a quick break. We'll be back by 11. And then I'll share with you part of the survey results that we found. As I mentioned, we are doing surveys along with this project. And then after that, we go into some breakout sessions. I'm going to put the question for the breakout sessions on the chat, and I'll share it on the screen. So with that, let's be back around 11 o'clock and go into our next hour. Thank you so much. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a chance to get a cup of coffee and stretch your legs. So we'll have another hour, and in the next hour, we'll get into breakout sessions. But before that, along the lines of what we heard this morning from our panelists, we had in our survey, we had a question, and I want to share the results of that question with you. If I can move my screen. Okay. So we've been doing a survey with about, well, 51 respondents. So what I'm sharing with you is based on the response of 51 respondents, and we're continuing this survey. But the question we asked was that, what work-based learning programs does your organization offer for STEM BSBA students? And I mean, the results here are not surprising. It's somewhat what we expected. So summer internships actually showed the highest number, and then followed by semester-long internships and co-ops. Of the 51, 5 actually said they have no programs in basically collaboration with academia in work-based learning. And 4 basically had programs, but they had to either put a stop to it because of COVID, or it was more of an ad hoc program. So you can see the spectrum along these lines. And also a subset said they do class projects with individuals and class projects for student teams. This is where we think is most of the project-based learnings come from, in addition to the traditional internships and co-ops. So just some data point, which is a lot of that we heard this morning from our speakers. And some interesting comments. So as a follow-on to this question, we asked, how do you make sure that underrepresented populations are engaged in your company's work-based learning programs? And we got a lot of textual responses on this. These are some of the ones that kind of stood out, and I also got repeated by folks. A variation of them got repeated by folks. So one said HBCU engagements are strategic to our hiring. Actively participating in groups that actually promote and foster underrepresented populations for opportunities in the future. Another one said get them introduced to the field when they're actually in middle school and high school, and so that they're encouraged to actually go to STEM 4-year programs. Another one said university programs designed to reach out to underrepresented groups and provide opportunities, including mentorship programs to help them succeed in internships. It sounds like a really well thought out program. The other one shared that they offer scholarship programs aimed at linking outstanding African-American engineering students to our internship programs with associated mentoring. And finally, that was an interesting comment, inclusion programs tied to accept compensation. So really encouraging encouraging feedback from those that we surveyed from industry. So with that, now we'll move into our breakout sessions. You'll be automatically put into a breakout session, and I think we have 4 breakout sessions. So some of your breakout sessions has a moderator already identified. One might not. I'll jump in there and ask someone to be a moderator, and moderator makes sure that the conversation stays on track and that there's a spokesperson after coming back who would read out on the highlights of the discussion. So before I go into the breakout sessions, any questions, any thoughts? Okay. So I'm gonna send everyone now into breakout sessions, and then you know, you'll be given some heads up when the breakout session will end. It'll go till about 11:30. Hello.
Hey, Rick McMaster, I see you there. It's been a while.
Jim, did you guys get kicked out of your session?
I got a note that it was ending, and then there was a little red thing down at the bottom to click. Was it not? Did I do it wrong?
No, you did it right. I don't know why others aren't back.
I think they don't know to click the little red thing down at the bottom to leave the session, not the meeting.
Oh. Yeah, it says it'll close in 30 seconds. All right.
Oh, okay, so it'll be automatic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, moments like these, I think of what Alex Kass said. I used to be afraid of public speaking. Now I'm afraid of technology not working.
Here they are.
Okay,
Automatically.
looks like everyone is back. Welcome back, everyone. And sorry, your groups ended up to be a little bit smaller because unfortunately we have to pre-assign these groups and people have to drop out. So so hopefully you had a good session. So why don't we go around the room and just discuss? We had 4 groups, and if we could do a readout from each group on what you guys discussed, that would be excellent. And Jim, you want to go first, since your picture shows up next to me, so I pick on you. And you're on mute.
That's probably better. Yeah, no worries.
You
Had a great discussion.
Oh,
Can you hear
sorry,
me?
that's my problem. Yeah, I can hear you. That was my problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, we had Dave and Antonio and I had a great discussion, and for folks, well, I think everybody knows Dave provides a great perspective from the startups, and Antonio's in Bogota, Colombia, so we got some very interesting insights of cross-cultural from Antonio. But the 6 barriers that we talked about were the barrier of getting more practical experience into the top universities. And it seems like maybe their philosophy is against practical experience, but it seems like top universities have to make peace with practical experience somehow. And then on the industry side, sometimes industry doesn't do as many internships as they could because budgets are too tight. Or sometimes it's because this is another barrier that's related to the lack of internships. Dave mentioned that sometimes employees see interns as a burden versus little gems, and you know, rather than focusing on the great talent that the student has and activating that talent, the employees will give the students really boring assignments. So there's a you know, doing interns well. There's like, you know, doing more internships, and then there's doing them better is a barrier. Another barrier that we talked about was feedback to job applicants. A lot of times the feedback you get is you didn't get the job, but there's no, you know, feedback that says of the top applicants for this job, here are the things that they had that we really valued that made them top applicants. So that would improve the communication and feedback. And Dave suggested that could be done in an anonymized way, so you're not calling out any particular individual's weaknesses or strengths, but just providing that feedback when a job is filled and closed, so that those who didn't get it get something meaningful that they can really take back. And that might be interesting for departments and universities to see that, like all of our students that applied and got rejected, these are the reasons they got rejected, you know, because the they didn't have these particular skills. So there's lots of ways, and maybe there's intermediaries that are showing up to try to bridge that communication gap, but that's definitely a barrier. And then Antonio made the point that there's still so many biases: race, age, ability, faith, religion. There's just, all these barriers associated with certain populations that, is a big, big issue. So that's a barrier. And then to Kelly's point, there was a barrier of, since every organization is different and has a different culture, we weren't aware of any reports that have really systematically categorized the best practices, but then indexed them by the culture of the organization that might have the most absorptive capacity to actually implement them. So there's like a lot of research that's missing that could be done, and that would be interesting and maybe reduce the barriers. So let me just see if Dave and Antonio have anything to add.
I think that was perfect. You said it better than we did.
Thanks, Dave. But yeah, it was great being with Dave and Antonio, because the start, I've worked at IBM and Apple, big companies. I have worked at a startup ages and ages ago, but Dave, I think you're really tuned into that startup thing, and having the session today, having like Cisco and IBM, and then your startup perspective was really, really excellent. It was a nice way to make sure that we just don't oversimplify and narrow in on a particular organizational culture. So back to you, Yasi.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. And to you and all the moderators or those who took notes, if you could please send those notes to me, email them to me, I would really appreciate it. That's really valuable. Okay, next, do I have a volunteer who wants to go next?
Yeah, we'll go for group 2.
Okay.
Okay, so 3 points here. We're going to make 3 points, and each one is going to take one. So I think Sukhandana made an excellent point about small business. I'll just turn it over to you, Sukhandana.
Yeah, if you think about, most jobs in America are created by small businesses. We know that, right? 2/3 of the jobs have come from corporate America. Sorry, yeah, small businesses. There's a huge shift now, though. The types of jobs small businesses are creating now wasn't the case 10 years ago. I'll give you one easy example. I own a bunch of coffee shops as a passion project. In my coffee shop, we now have a marketing team. The marketing team focuses on digital marketing. Either it's creating email campaign, TikTok videos, Google ads, all sorts of technique that now needed to run the coffee shop. A decade ago, those roles did not exist. And a decade ago, those higher paying jobs for a coffee shop did not exist. Mostly it was a manager or two and all hourly employee. So I was making the point that as academic perspective, instead of only focusing on large corporation for internship and co-op, there's opportunity to looking at the small business pipeline, where it may be in small number, but in aggregate, there may be a lot of great jobs or experiences the students can get by doing it. So one example was one of the university and working on where students run a coffee shop for a semester, where they can learn how to run it, learn how to run a P&L, do all the hiring, does all the marketing, right? You really get end-to-end experiences, which is close to impossible to get if you just join a small subdivision of a corporation. So that's one of the area we're thinking about, how does academia focuses on and create a new pipeline of jobs and opportunity and experiences for students.
Thank you, Sukhandana. And Catherine talked very eloquently about the generational gap, between employers, university side, and the students we're talking about. So, Catherine, take it.
Right. It's just that I noticed even with the people here at the panel, how so many of us have gray hair here. And and yet the people that we're going after are so much younger us. And learn in different ways, use so many different tools. How do we, it's kind of like barriers, how do we get to them too? Not so much between industry and academia, but just between almost the two generations that we have going on here. How do we, you know, get into the thinking of those non-gray hairs?
And my part, I just want to add one point, so I can bring the university perspective. One of the biggest challenges is very, very operational in nature. Like as we are trying to convert UCSC, and I'm leading the parade to create partnerships with the industry. And again, to Catherine and Sukhanta's point, I've been focusing on the large ones. I think that, you know, we need to. It helped me rethink. But the point being that we're not equipped organizationally to do this. You know, I think Gonzalo mentioned Northeastern, and I wrote for them. They probably have close to 100 people generating co-ops and internships. They do 12,000 of these a year. And so this takes a commitment. And so I'm starting by redirecting one of my existing people from student success to doing this. But see, it's not even just finding a warm body. It takes a different kind of a skill to be the outreach person to the industry, you know, because a lot of student counseling and career centers are how to write your resume and LinkedIn profile and all that kind of stuff, as opposed to having the sales skill of going out there and telling a story. So even you know, as you know, all large organizations have inertia. Budgeting is done incrementally. So trying to create this new, it has to become strategic. It has to come top down. So it's a big challenge. I mean, it's a big operational organization challenge to get them to think differently. Okay, so those are the three things we wanted to contribute.
Excellent. Thank you, PK. And Martha, should I put you on spot? You're mute, Martha.
You can put me on the spot if you like. I was in the group that already reported out.
Sorry.
Tammy. But I would build on what has been said.
Martha, I have not yet reported out.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
You gave us such a good report internally. Let's share it.
Very, very good. So, Yasi, we had talked about 6 barriers and offered 4 possible solutions. And the barriers are that it requires a lot of attention and investment to maintain and sustain the bridge between academia and industry. Number 2 is that there are differences in the pace of decision and adjustment making. There are differences in the decision process in itself, who makes the decision and how they are made between those 2 entities. There are differences in the incentive structure between the 2 entities. And then there are differences in psychology and culture. For example, in academia, knowledge may be recognized more than skills. And any of my breakthrough session members can expound on any of this. The 4 solutions that we had time to mention are number 1, getting learners to work on real problems while still a student, and having industry bring in a realistic context into the classroom and have that be shared within the classroom. We also mentioned creation of micro-credentialing as a stepping stone to an eventual degree. And then we would like to see new money. Don't take money from established programs to pay for new initiatives. So my co-conspirators in this were Martha Russell, Kelly Bailey, and Vital Prabhu. And if you have anything to add, please do so.
A quick comment there, Zami. You made an excellent summary. I envy your skill on that. What I was thinking as an instructor is if the Ciscos and the IBMs could give a semester worth of real problem that they're tackling, bring it into a class, and maybe it would be less burdensome than managing a dozen interns, but you might have a class of 20 or 40 students working on it. You engage with them, interact with them maybe every 2 or 3 weeks. So it's not that much time consuming from the industry perspective, but at the same time, you can share the context with students while they get a chance to apply what they're learning in the class to real problems. So something of a capstone, but on a larger scale. So this might be a solution that'll flesh out the spectrum between capstone projects and internships and all the other things that we talked about.
Thanks. And Martha, you were about to say something when I interrupted you, so sorry.
Thank you. It was a build. We didn't talk about it in our group, but I think that the concept, and it has to be heartfelt, of wanting to serve as an agent for the other is critically important in building the relationships that inspire people to take agency for another person and their program, to see another person's success is a really critical element.
Thanks,
Great
Martha.
point. Are
I think
anything
we're
else?
done, Yassi, from
Okay.
unless Kelly has something to say. Sorry.
Oh no, I'm good. Wonderful summary, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Yassi.
Great point. And I think there's another group. Gonzalo, was that your group that we haven't heard from yet?
Yes, that's right. Our group. I know that Gucci was furiously taking notes, so
Okay.
maybe she captured the sense of what the group discussed.
Okay, I'll share what we captured. I think a lot of the focus, and I take responsibility of this, but one of the key takeaways in our group was that that the infusion or the entry points for kids really has to come earlier in the pipeline. So not in the at the university level, but really try to bring it as early on in the K-12 pipeline to build student interests so that they can invest in pursuing these careers and having the right set of skills that are needed in industry. And so we Scott kindly talked a lot about, the open course software that's available out there, MIT and open source, that schools, K-12, maybe in the K-12 space, might be able to tap into in order to start building that pathway towards tech careers. We also talked a lot about, how we all know about that the industry is talent starved, and so we really need to bring in a larger pool of kids again at a younger age, knowing that it funnels out as we go through time, but that we build that pipeline early on, and we cast a very wide net so that those that persist and pursue the degrees really are there and are in abundance, in the future years. Let me see, I think that was, and then Scott also talked a lot about robotics as another way, as a way to address some of these barriers for the students, in these early ages, as a way to build interest. And I think the other important point that also came up is the willingness that Scott raised about how industry might be willing to participate even in curriculum development, right? So having those conversations so that we can be very intentional about building the skills needed for the pipeline was another takeaway. And Scott and Gonzalo, feel free to jump in with other thoughts.
No, I thought you hit it great. That was kind of the themes, is really looking back at K through 12. I mean, a lot of the problems that we're facing now, or when I sit in front of university students, I almost get the sense that it's too late, and we find ourselves kind of trying to do some patchwork solution with the talent that we've got, or retrofit people who were doing something else. And I'm an example of that. I was studying physics, and now I'm in technology, and so it was a big learning curve for me. Luckily they teach you things like deductive reasoning and logic and things like that, but it's still, we could probably shorten that curve a lot if we were to probably be a bit more have a greater level of infusion at earlier grades. And I don't mean just come in on career day and say, hey, this is what I do, come join us, or come check out our technology firm, but really kind of more boots on the ground, day-to-day efforts where we're taking the time to, the same level of involvement that we show with universities, maybe do that, right? Maybe we reverse engineer those skills that we know so clearly that we want out of our candidates, and maybe we reverse engineer that back into the curriculum, all the way back into K through 12, to make sure that by the time people get there, they line up with what we're. And I think that this, sort of what Gucci was talking about there just a minute ago, which this talent starvation that we're kind of going through right now, and this bidding war for talent that we're seeing, especially in technology, a lot of that, I mean, obviously it could be good for the individuals, but at the same time, it could be destructive for companies, in the sense that, I'm seeing it far too often now where somebody's working somewhere for a year and a half or two and then moving on to the next place just so that they can, make more money, quote unquote. So, we do maybe want a little bit more stability and retention, all that. And I think in order to do that, we're going to have to, put some Band-Aids on this that are a bit more permanent, right? Where it's address the talent starvation that we're facing by having the right number of people with the talents that we're looking for at the right time. So looking back that way. Scott, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Thanks. Great summaries, Gucci and Gonzalo. I just add from an organizational point of view that I wonder whether Gucci with her Palo Alto Foundation and Gonzalo with Cisco might be able to somehow invest in educational institutions. Say Gonzalo with Cisco in Duke University, and particular computer science, programs that might then lead to further collaboration between the graduates and Cisco, or Gucci with even Lego robotics, with Scratch programming, drag and drop programming, much out of the MIT Media Lab, and with the We Do 2.0 kit for elementary kids, and the Lego Spike Prime, fairly new one for maybe middle school kids, and Mindstorms for high school kids. So as organizations, could they lower these barriers and reduce these barriers by focusing on specific programs to get talent? Thanks. Sorry to go on.
Okay. Sounds like we heard from all the groups. Thank you so much. Again, if you could send your notes to me, my email is yasi@isip.org. I would really appreciate it. This was a great session. Thanks to each and every one of you. Thanks to our speakers, to our wonderful moderator, PK. You're an excellent moderator, and every speaker was really intriguing and great speakers. And something that the purpose of this workshop was really, NSF asked us whether there is a one-to-one matching between how industry recruits talent for specialized and foundational skills, and student transcripts, for example, coursework. And so we clearly know now that there is no such mapping, but in order to create such mapping, create such alignment, it's these common points that touch points that industry and academia can create and build bridges around, and we're seeing that a lot of forward-looking companies are doing that, and a lot of forward-looking institutions are doing that. So that's really encouraging, and I think we all want here to see more of that, and hopefully our work and our research will shed some light on as to how we could do that. So with that, thank you all so much. please join us we have 2 other workshops, one on the 8th of December and one on the 15th of December. Please join us for that conversation. We would love to have you. And we still have 3 minutes. Any questions, any thoughts before we say goodbye?
Before we wrap up, I think we do all thank you to Yasi for, her leadership in making this happen.
Thank you so much, PK, and thanks everyone. I couldn't do it without every single one of you. So, okay. Until next time, again, many thanks and have a great rest of the day. Oh, and I want to actually acknowledge PK. After 2 years of never going to an office, PK kindly let me use UC Santa Cruz facilities, the extension, for those of you who are local in Santa Clara. So thank you, PK.
Yeah, okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you to everyone. It's a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.